Stonewall UK is the LGBT plus advocacy group for the UK. It was first founded in 1989 to campaign against Section 28 of the Local Government Act, an infamous series of laws which prohibited local authorities, including teachers, from even acknowledging the existence of gay and bisexual people on grounds that doing so would constitute the promotion of homosexuality. Through its work, Stonewall would go on to establish itself as one of the most recognised and trusted LGBT plus advocacy groups in the UK, earning its charity status in 2003 after not only successfully campaigning to end Section 28, but to equalise the age of consent in the UK. And in honour of its origins, Stonewall has made no attempt to hide the fact that it exists to campaign on behalf of the rights and dignity of all members of the LGBT plus community, a community that includes the trans people, specifically trans women of colour, who were instrumental in instigating the very US uprising the charity took its name from. So, you can imagine my disbelief as, over the last week, the BBC began running articles with titles such as "Stonewall's Influence on BBC and Ofcom Revealed" and "LGBT Charity Dictated Policy to Welsh Government." Articles that amount to little more than someone pretending as if Stonewall acting in accordance with their public mission statement is somehow a shocking revelation. And yet, that was only the tip of the iceberg. The article's author, David Thompson, is also the editor for an investigative journalism series called Nolan Investigates, with presenter Stephen Nolan. And wouldn't you know it, they've gone ahead and published an 11-part series targeting Stonewall, totaling 6.5 hours of... I don't know what to call it. It sure as hell isn't journalism, I know that for sure. But that only leaves us the great task of figuring out what the hell is going on? Why is the BBC making this move now? What do they hope to gain by demonising a charity's work? And what damage can we expect to come about as a result? Though before we can get around to doing that, I just need to give a content warning for the following topics: queerphobia, with a specific focus on transphobia, child sexual assault, hate crime, and police brutality. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media like Twitter and Discord. So the first thing I should start by noting here is the fact that this is by no means the first time Stonewall has been targeted in this manner, even recently. Indeed, there seems to have been a concerted effort to smear one of the few advocacy groups with enough power to stand up for the trans community during a period which can only be described as an ongoing attempt to eliminate us from public life. Conservatives, the Christian right, and even outright Nazis have really stepped up their harassment campaigns these past few years. And the scary thing is, broadcasting groups like the BBC have been uncritically platforming them under the guise of impartiality, changing the definition of which to mean all perspectives are equal, more so the ones I agree with, as opposed to I should assess each of these critically to reach a conclusion grounded in the evidence. Sadly, it seems that journalism in the UK has largely gone the way of the dinosaurs in that it's either dead or it's evolved into something completely unrecognisable. I mean, how do we go from a T-Rex to birds terrified of broccoli? Of course, a big part of said harassment is targeting the few organisations sticking up for LGBT plus folk, such as Stonewall. A notable example of this was when the hate organisation the LGB Alliance, an astroturf front for the far right against all LGBT plus folk, tried to declare all UK LGBT plus charities, including Stonewall, homophobic. This was the same LGB Alliance whose founder, Malcolm Clark, publicly declared LGBT plus inclusive education in schools dangerous due to, quote, predatory gay teachers, end quote, calling the lessons, quote, unnecessary encouragement to predators, end quote. And wouldn't you know it, Nolan and Thompson are intimately familiar with the LGB Alliance and their homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, with the hate group being one of their primary sources in the exposé. I should also note that Mr. Clark has ties to the BBC, as can be seen in the About section of the LGB Alliance website. And if you think this is all unrelated, consider this little factoid leaked to the public last month by none other than failed comedian turned professional transphobe Graham Linehan. After his abusive behaviour towards any woman that disagrees with him was pointed out, Graham went on to state that, quote, Sarah was part of a WhatsApp group of journalists and cowardly skeptics who were working in the background on fighting gender ideology to absolutely zero effect. End quote. What's interesting is the fact that nobody at the BBC felt this revelation was worth covering. That the fact that there's a group of transphobes using the UK press to coordinate the Oh Little harassment campaign against the trans community was something worth reporting on. It does make one wonder about how many of the names in that group are people working at the BBC or those with connections within the BBC. That would have actually been some explosive reporting, but neither Thompson nor Nolan seem interested in investigating their peers, and perhaps even themselves, let's just be honest here. Thing is, this isn't even the first time the BBC has shown its true colours. Last year we covered the fact that the BBC had banned its staff from attending Pride events under the guise of preserving impartiality, only to try and backpedal when they were rightfully dragged out on it. Quick side note here, one of the groups doing the calling out was of course Stonewall. A fact I'm sure has no relevance to what could be viewed as a retaliatory vendetta the BBC harbours towards Stonewall. Returning to the banning of Pride, as covered by us at the time, the BBC began claiming that attending Pride was not an issue, so long as BBC staff members weren't seen to be engaging in anything political. Now, what do they mean by political? Well, according to one BBC staff member, they were told anything involving trans issues would be considered political and thereby grounds for immediate dismissal. It's here that we see the true horror of what the BBC and other groups are attempting to do. They are defining the very existence, the rights and the dignity of all trans people as inherently political as a means of soft banning Pride. They don't have to state you cannot attend Pride. All they have to do is make staff hesitant to do so in case their support or membership to the LGBT+ community could be construed in a manner as being political, thus potentially risking their job. That ambiguity is almost more terrifying than an outright ban, and it has had the desired impact, as revealed in a Vice article published a week before the BBC launched its attack on Stonewall. The fact that the BBC was likely to withdraw from Stonewall's LGBT+ diversity programme was leaked ahead of time, with a number of BBC employees approaching actual journalists at Vice under anonymity. One stated that, quote, BBC bosses feel that they can't allow the organisation to be connected to Stonewall in any way because the BBC needs to be impartial on LGBTQ lies. So the current plan is to quietly withdraw from the scheme by just not renewing their membership. I'm super scared about this sliding back on supporting LGBT employees. End quote. Of course, quiet quickly went out the window with the attack on Stonewall. However, another individual noted that the argument regarding impartiality didn't really stand, considering LGBT+ rights are already protected under the law, stating, quote, the BBC needs to focus on the bigger picture rather than fiddling around the edges on things that the audience won't care about. LGBT rights are already enshrined in law, so aligning with an LGBT charity shouldn't really affect impartiality. End quote. Of course, this entire ordeal has really taken its toll, leading other employees to start questioning their place at the BBC with, quote, it's starting to feel like we're working for the enemy. I'm starting to wonder what I'm promoting by being here. They're saying that they don't care about our welfare in the workplace. They don't care about treating LGBT employees with respect and dignity. BBC managers need to think long and hard about this before they commit to such drastic action. The message that this sends out to LGBTQ staff is dreadful. It says we don't care about your rights. We don't care about your values. It's just ludicrous. End quote. And to be clear, these are not the feelings of people who don't remember the homophobia of decades past, as this last statement by a fourth individual reveals. Quote, I've worked for the BBC for over 20 years, and I've never known a worse time to be LGBT+ at the BBC. There is deeply ingrained institutional transphobia at the heart of the BBC, exacerbated by promotion of anti-LGBT+ views in the name of balance. I no longer feel safe as an LGBT+ person within the organisation. End quote. Think about that for a second. The anti-LGBT+ sentiment inside the BBC is worse now than the time prior to the repealing of Section 28 and the equalisation of sexual consent. That's how bad LGBT+ veterans feel things have become. Of course, none of this was included in the BBC report, not even as a footnote. So much for impartiality. Of course, the LGBT+ community has all but unanimously come out in condemnation of what is largely viewed to be an attack on the community as a whole. Because when you attack the most trusted LGBT+ advocacy group in the UK during an onslaught of queer phobia, pretending like them doing what they have always done is part of some insidious agenda, you are attacking the rights and dignity of every LGBT+ person in the country. This is nothing but the whole gay mafia shit repackaged and kicked into overdrive because said groups are advocating on behalf of trans folk. We've been here before. Hell, the BBC has been here before. And yet it's set on repeating its shameful actions once more. And before people come at me with, well, Stonewall has lost its way. It used to be about gay rights, but it's now about trans agenda. Just shut the fuck up. Seriously. People like you are the reason lesbian and bisexual women are being targeted in public. People like you are the reason it's become okay once again to accuse random gay men of being child groomers. People like you are why LGBT+ rights as a whole are backsliding in the UK. So take your divide and conquer stratagem, which, by the way, the vast majority of LGBT+ folk reject outright, and shove it, you nasty little troglodyte. It is no coincidence that in 2014 to 2015, the year same-gender marriage was legalised, there were 6,363 reported hate crimes motivated by a person's sexuality, a number that has tripled to 19,679 in 2020 to 2021. And this isn't the result of increased reporting, with Gallup finding that only 13% of cases are reported to police, with a quarter of LGBT+ hate crime victims being afraid of police. That also means the number of actual incidents this year can be estimated to be closer to 150,000. And those are just the cases of people targeting others due to their perceived sexuality. Over the same period, transphobic hate crimes increased from 598 to 2,588, with the actual number of incidents being higher than 19,000 this year. Now, what has changed? Well, we've seen an ongoing harassment campaign targeting trans people by groups pretending to speak on behalf of lesbian, gay, and bisexual folk, only to turn around and paint said people as a threat as well. These issues are not isolated. People like Thompson and Nolan are directly responsible for the spike in anti-queer hate crimes across the board, platformed by media groups like the BBC and legitimised by bigoted politicians in both major parties. And it needs to fucking stop. I mean, if for nothing else, then at least do it to stop people such as Thompson and Nolan embarrassing themselves, showing just how little research their expose used. You see, the article on Stonewall apparently dictating Welsh policy keeps referencing what it calls Stonewall's interpretation of the 2010 Equality Act. Now, what is this reference to? Well, the fact that gender is covered as a protected category, meaning that a trans person is not legally required to medically transition in order to be protected under the Equalities Law. The exact wording of the 2010 Equality Act was, a person has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment if the person, quote, is proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing physiological or other attributes of sex, end quote. Emphasis added by me. Note the specific mention of other attributes as being separate to physiological, clearly indicating non-physiological attributes, i.e. social and legal transitioning, as basis. This was elaborated on by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who stated very bluntly that, quote, to be protected from gender reassignment discrimination, you do not need to have undergone any specific treatment or surgery to change from your birth sex to your preferred gender. This is because changing your physiological or other gender attributes is a personal process rather than a medical one. End quote. And this was put to the test last year in the case of Patrice Hughes and Jaguar Land Rover. The judge found Jaguar Land Rover to be discriminating against Hughes, who is non-binary, in spite of Jaguar Land Rover arguing that, quote, gender reassignment only applies to people who have transitioned between the binary genders of male and female, end quote. Said argument was struck down, which is why various legal experts have begun including it as a landmark case. Because whilst it's not legally definitive until it has received a tribunal, it may nonetheless be called upon in future cases until it has been legally overturned. So in total, we have two areas of government, both Parliament and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a judge, and numerous legal experts, each telling us that a trans person is not legally required to medically transition in order to be covered by the Equality Act. So, how did Thompson and Nolan react? By copy-pasting their response regarding the aforementioned limitations of the case on Twitter, and acting as if that meant something to the larger point. That's what passes for journalism these days at the BBC, the sort of semantic wordplay I'd expect from teenage frat boys caught out on their bullshit. That's what your TV license goes towards. But you know what's worse? It's how the Chuckle Brothers justify declaring this the Stonewall interpretation in spite of Stonewall not having been involved in the previous case, as far as I'm aware. Here's what they argued. Quote, however, in a document sent to Stonewall and seen by the BBC, the term gender reassignment has been replaced with the term gender identity in the Welsh Government's equality and diversity policy. End quote. Let me say that again. The Welsh Government sent Stonewall a document in which it decided to use clearer terminology than the 2010 Equality Act. And that makes it Stonewall's interpretation. This is why I'm not wasting your time slogging through 6.5 hours of what can only be described as anti-LGBT+ propaganda. There's really no point, and I think both yours and my time is much better spent covering the big picture in relation to the BBC's actions and just how much harm they're already causing LGBT+ folk, both those who work at the BBC and the wider community. BBC News and reporting, at least when it comes to queer issues, is dead for all intents and purposes. It has been strangled by a Tory government that will seek to puppet its corpse to justify its continued attacks on the queer community. Which only leaves us with what you all think. Will the attacks on Stonewall come to an end anytime soon? Are we likely to see any sort of accountability for those encouraging violence against the LGBT+ community? Did I miss something you noticed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Just understand that abuse won't make it through. If you like what we do here, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gert van Voorst, and Cthulhu. And from myself, Udita and Levi, take care now.